I used to think I knew what love looked like. It was Marcus making my coffee every morning, his warm smile when I came home from my 12-hour nursing shifts at Austin General, the way he would wrap his arms around me while we watched movies on Sunday afternoons. We had been married for 3 years, and I genuinely believed we were building something beautiful together. If someone had told me that in 2 weeks I would watch the man I loved get beaten bloody right in front of me, and that I would be the one who let it happen, I would have laughed at them. Before I share the story that changed my life forever, let me know what city you are watching from. And if you have ever experienced moments where you later wished you had acted differently, please hit like and subscribe so we can learn from these mistakes together. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. Marcus had been working late more frequently, explaining that his software engineering team at the startup was pushing hard on a new project that could change everything for the company. I understood demanding jobs. After all, I spent my days saving lives in the emergency room. But something felt different this time. It started with the phone calls. Marcus would step outside to take them, claiming they were from clients in different time zones. When his phone rang at 11:30 p.m. one night, he answered with an apologetic smile and whispered something about customers in Asia needing urgent support. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the way he turned his back to me while talking, the way he lowered his voice until it was barely audible, made my stomach twist with an unfamiliar anxiety. Then came the text messages. Marcus had always been open with his phone, leaving it on counters, asking me to check messages while he drove. Suddenly he kept it face down constantly, and would flip the screen away if I glanced over while he was typing. When I asked about it, he said the startup was implementing new security protocols about client confidentiality. It sounded reasonable, but my nursing training had taught me to notice when something did not add up. The real evidence started piling up the following week. While doing laundry, I found a receipt in Marcus's shirt pocket from the Capitol Grill, one of Austin's most expensive restaurants. The date was last Wednesday, and it showed dinner for 2 people totaling over $200. That was the same night Marcus had told me he grabbed a sandwich at the office and worked until 9 p.m. When I held that receipt in my hands, my heart started pounding so hard I thought I might need to check my own pulse. I confronted him that evening, trying to keep my voice steady. Marcus looked genuinely confused at first, then his face cleared with what seemed like relief. He explained that he had taken an important female client to dinner as part of closing a major deal. The company was encouraging relationship building with key accounts, and his boss had specifically requested he handle this particular client because she was considering a significant investment. His explanation made sense, but something in his eyes looked distant, like he was reciting lines from a script rather than sharing a memory. I wanted to believe him so desperately that I pushed my doubts down and apologized for questioning him. But the doubts refused to stay buried. A few days later, I noticed an unfamiliar scent on his work shirts. It was a light floral perfume that definitely was not mine. I used a woody amber fragrance that Marcus loved, but this was something completely different, something young and fresh and expensive smelling. When I mentioned it, Marcus said there had been a company party where people were celebrating the client deal, and someone must have hugged him during the congratulations. That weekend, my father, Frank, showed up unannounced at our door. Frank was 55 years old, a retired mechanic with rough hands and an even rougher past. My parents had divorced when I was 16, after my mother discovered Frank had been having affairs for most of their marriage. He claimed he had changed since then, but seeing him standing in my doorway brought back all the memories of my mother crying at the kitchen table, while Frank made excuse after excuse. Frank took one look at me and immediately knew something was wrong. I had inherited his ability to read people, and apparently he had passed down his talent for recognizing the signs of a troubled relationship. Over coffee, I found myself telling him about Marcus's late nights, the phone calls, the restaurant receipt, the perfume. I expected him to tell me I was overthinking things, that all marriages went through rough patches. Instead, Frank's face darkened with a familiar anger. He leaned back in his kitchen chair and shook his head slowly. Men are all the same, sweetheart. He said, his voice heavy with the weight of his own guilt. I have been there, I know the signs. Your husband is hiding something big from you, and you need to act before it gets worse. I wanted to defend Marcus, to argue that Frank was projecting his own mistakes onto my marriage. But the seeds of doubt he planted found fertile ground in my already anxious mind. Frank spent the next hour telling me stories about how affairs typically unfold, how cheaters always have explanations for everything, how they make their victims feel crazy for asking questions. By the time Frank left that evening, I felt like a different person. The trust I had built with Marcus over 3 years felt fragile and cracked. I started paying attention to every detail of his behavior, analyzing his words for hidden meanings, searching for more evidence of his supposed betrayal. The following week brought a phone call that shattered whatever remained of my trust. I was folding laundry in the bedroom when I heard Marcus talking quietly in the living room. His words drifted through the house like poison. I know this is hard, but you have to be patient a little longer. We will be able to go public soon, I promise. My hand started shaking so violently that I dropped the towel I was holding. Public about what? Who was he talking to? I crept closer to the doorway, straining to hear more, but Marcus must have sensed my presence because he quickly ended the call and claimed it was a work colleague discussing the timeline for announcing their new product launch. I wanted to believe him, but Frank's warnings echoed in my head. I made a decision that would haunt me for months afterward. I called my best friend Jasmine and asked her to do something I never thought I would request: follow my husband. Jasmine was a private investigator who specialized in insurance fraud, and she owed me a favor after I helped her through a difficult medical situation the previous year. She agreed reluctantly, warning me that I might not like what she discovered. I told her I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. 3 days later, Jasmine called with news that felt like a physical blow. She had followed Marcus to the Omni Hotel downtown, where she watched him meet a tall blonde woman in an expensive business suit. They had gone inside together, and Jasmine waited in the parking lot for 2 hours before Marcus emerged alone. The woman had apparently stayed inside. When I confronted Marcus that evening, he became more defensive than I had ever seen him. He accused me of paranoia and suggested that I was looking for problems that did not exist. He said the stress of my job was making me imagine things, and maybe we should consider couples counseling to work through my trust issues. His reaction felt like confirmation of my worst fears. Why would an innocent man be so angry about his wife's concerns? Frank visited again the next weekend, and when I told him about the hotel incident, his rage was immediate and intense. That son of a bitch is playing you for a fool, he said, pacing around my kitchen like a caged animal. He is not just cheating on you, he is making you think you are crazy for noticing. This is exactly what I used to do to your mother. Frank's admission should have been a warning sign, but instead it felt like validation. Here was someone who understood the mind of a cheater, someone who could help me navigate this nightmare. I felt grateful to have him on my side, someone who would not let Marcus continue to manipulate me. The final piece of evidence came when Marcus left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he showered. I knew I was crossing a line by looking through his messages, but I felt desperate for answers. What I found made me physically sick to my stomach. There was a text conversation with someone listed as S in his contacts. The messages were sparse but devastating. Tonight was perfect. I cannot wait until this is all over and we can be together openly. Love you. The message was sent last Tuesday, the same night Marcus claimed he had worked late on debugging code. I sat staring at the screen until the words blurred through my tears. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of building a life together, and it had all been a lie. I spent that night crying until I had no tears left. Frank found me the next morning sitting at the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes, staring at nothing. When I showed him the messages, His face went through a transformation that scared me. The anger was no longer just protective, it was primal and dangerous. "You cannot let him get away with this," Frank said, his voice low and threatening. "Men like Marcus think they can treat women however they want, because there are no consequences. But there are going to be consequences this time. I am going to make sure of that." Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs in Frank's tone. I should have remembered that his anger had destroyed my parents' marriage, that violence had never solved anything in our family's history. But in my pain and humiliation, his rage felt like the protection I needed. We planned our confrontation carefully. Frank would be there when Marcus came home, not to start a fight, but to make sure Marcus could not lie his way out of the situation again. I would present the evidence calmly and demand the truth. Frank would serve as my witness and support ensuring that Marcus could not gaslight me into doubting what I had seen with my own eyes. Marcus arrived home at 9:15 p.m. on Friday night carrying his laptop bag and looking exhausted from another long day. He smiled when he saw me, that same warm smile that had melted my heart for 3 years, and asked how my shift at the hospital had gone. His casual normalcy after everything I had discovered felt like another slap in the face. Frank emerged from the living room before I could answer, and Marcus's smile immediately faded into confusion. "Hey, Frank," Marcus said cautiously, clearly sensing the tension in the air. "I did not know you were visiting this week." I stood up from the kitchen table and placed printouts of the text messages in front of Marcus. My hands surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I found these on your laptop," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know about her, Marcus. I know about the hotel, the dinners, all of it." Marcus looked down at the papers and his face went completely white. "Autumn, this is not what it looks like," he said, reaching toward me. "I can explain everything, but I need you to trust me for just a little longer. There are things I cannot tell you yet, but it is not what you think." The word trust hit me like a physical blow. After months of lies and secrets, he was asking me to trust him. Frank stepped forward, his hands already clenched into fists. "Do not insult her intelligence, you piece of garbage," Frank growled. "We know exactly what this is. The question is whether you are man enough to admit it." Marcus turned to face Frank directly, and I saw something change in his expression. He was no longer the apologetic husband trying to explain himself. He was a man preparing to defend himself. "Frank, I understand you want to protect Autumn, but this is between my wife and me. I am asking you to let us work this out privately." Frank laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Privately? You mean, so you can lie to her some more, so you can convince her that she is crazy for believing her own eyes? I have seen this before, boy. I have been where you are now." That was when Marcus made what I now realize was a crucial mistake. He turned to me with desperation in his eyes and said, "Autumn, if you love me, you will give me 2 more weeks to explain everything. I cannot tell you the details right now, but I swear on my mother's life that I have never cheated on you." The mention of his mother felt like manipulation to me. Marcus's mother lived in Dallas, and we rarely spoke to her. Using her as collateral for his lies seemed particularly cruel. But it was Frank's reaction that pushed everything over the edge. "You lying son of a bitch!" Frank roared, lunging forward and grabbing Marcus by the shirt. "Do not you dare bring your mother into this. Real men do not hide behind their mothers when they get caught cheating." Marcus shoved Frank away harder than necessary, and suddenly they were both standing in fighting stances in my kitchen. I should have stepped between them, should have de-escalated the situation, but I was frozen by shock and anger, and the feeling that Marcus deserved whatever was about to happen. Frank threw the first real punch, connecting with Marcus's jaw and sending him stumbling backward into the refrigerator. Marcus recovered quickly and swung back, catching Frank in the shoulder. They grappled against the counter, knocking over my coffee maker and sending fruit rolling across the floor. I watched in horror as the 2 most important men in my life tried to hurt each other, in the space where Marcus and I had shared thousands of peaceful meals. Frank was older but more experienced in fighting. Marcus was younger, but completely unprepared for physical violence. Frank's next punch split Marcus's lip, and blood immediately started flowing down his chin onto his white work shirt. When Marcus wiped the blood away, and I saw the genuine confusion and hurt in his eyes, something inside me broke. This was not the face of a guilty man. This was the face of someone who could not understand why his wife was allowing him to be attacked in his own home. But instead of stopping the fight, I panicked and made the worst decision of my life. I called 911. The dispatcher asked what my emergency was, and I heard myself saying that my husband had attacked my father. Even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were not entirely true. Frank had thrown the first punch, but Marcus had pushed him first, and they were both fighting now. But in my emotional state, with years of Frank's warnings about cheating men echoing in my head, I painted Marcus as the aggressor. The police arrived within 6 minutes, finding Frank with a bruised shoulder and Marcus with a bloody nose and split lip. Frank immediately went into victim mode, explaining to the officers how Marcus had become violent when confronted about his affair. He showed them the printed text messages as evidence of Marcus's guilt, and claimed that Marcus had attacked him when he tried to protect his daughter. I stood there and let Frank lie to the police. I let them handcuff my husband and walk him out of our home while he kept saying, "Autumn, please. You know, I would never hurt you or your family. You know this is not who I am." But I did not know that anymore. The man I thought I knew would not have secret hotel meetings and mysterious text messages. The man I thought I knew would not have lied to me for months. As the police car drove away with Marcus in the back seat, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and nausea that I will never forget. Frank put his arm around my shoulders and said, "You did the right thing, sweetheart. Now he knows there are consequences for treating you like garbage." But as I stood in my kitchen looking at the bloodstains on the white tiles and the broken pieces of my coffee maker, I wondered if I had actually done the right thing, or if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. Marcus spent 24 hours in jail before making bail, and I spent those same 24 hours unable to sleep, eat, or think clearly about anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face when the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The confusion and betrayal in his expression haunted me more than any of the evidence I had found against him. Frank tried to reassure me that I had done the right thing, but his words felt hollow in the silence of my empty house. I kept walking through the rooms Marcus and I had decorated together, touching the furniture we had picked out as a couple, and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. On Saturday afternoon, while I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at my untouched lunch, Marcus's phone rang. I had forgotten that he left it behind when the police took him away. Without thinking, I answered it. "Hello, is this?" Marcus said, a young woman's voice on the other end. "This is Sarah from Austin Cancer Center. We need to confirm his appointment to bring his mother in for her follow-up treatment on Monday. He said he would be driving her down from Dallas." The words hit me like ice water. Cancer Center Marcus's mother. I managed to stammer out a few questions, and Sarah explained that Marcus had been listed as the primary caregiver for his mother's treatment for the past 6 months. She was receiving chemotherapy for stage 4 pancreatic cancer and had been staying at hotels in Austin for her weekly treatments. My hands started shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. I asked Sarah for more details, and she told me that Marcus had specifically requested that all communications go through him because his mother did not want to worry other family members until they knew more about her prognosis. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour. Then I did what I should have done. Months earlier, I called Marcus's mother directly. Diana Johnson answered on the second ring, and her voice was weak but warm. When I identified myself as Marcus's wife, she started crying immediately. "Oh, sweetheart," she said through her tears. "Marcus told me he was waiting for the right time to tell you about my illness. He did not want to burden you with worry while you were dealing with such stressful work at the hospital. The next 20 minutes were the most devastating of my life. Diana explained that she had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 8 months earlier, just after Marcus and I had returned from our anniversary trip to Colorado. The doctors had given her 6 months to live, but she was responding better to treatment than expected. Marcus had been driving to Dallas every weekend to see her, she said, and had arranged for her to receive treatment in Austin so he could be more involved in her care. The hotel stays, the mysterious phone calls, the stressed behavior, it all made perfect sense now. But what about the text messages? I asked, my voice breaking. What about the woman he was meeting? Diana's gentle laugh was tinged with sadness. That would be Sarah, my nurse. She is about your age, very sweet girl. Marcus has been coordinating with her to make sure I get the best possible care. He even arranged for me to stay at nice hotels instead of cheap motels, because he said I deserved comfort during this difficult time. As Diana talked about her son's devotion, about how he had rearranged his entire life to care for her, while trying to protect me from the stress of her illness, I felt my world crumbling in a completely different way than it had the night before. This was not the collapse of discovering betrayal. This was the implosion of realizing I had betrayed the most loyal man I had ever known. The text message from S suddenly made horrible sense. Tonight was perfect could have been referring to a good day of treatment. I cannot wait until this is all over could have meant until Diana's cancer treatment was finished, not until Marcus could leave his wife. Love you is what a son says to his dying mother. I had interpreted every piece of evidence through the lens of suspicion that Frank had given me. I had seen affair where there was actually sacrifice lies, where there was actually protection betrayal, where there was actually love deeper than I had ever imagined. When I hung up with Diana, I immediately drove to the county jail to post Marcus's bail and bring him home. But when he walked out of that building, the man I had loved for 3 years looked at me like I was a stranger. His lip was still swollen, his nose was bruised, and his eyes held a coldness I had never seen before. I tried to explain what I had learned, tried to apologize for doubting him, but Marcus held up his hand to stop me. I understand why you were suspicious, Autumn, he said quietly. But what I cannot understand is why you let your father attack me in our home. What I cannot understand is why you called the police and lied about what happened. The drive home was silent, except for my attempts to apologize, and Marcus's polite but distant responses. When we pulled into our driveway, he got out without waiting for me and went straight to the bedroom to pack a bag. I am going to stay with my mother, he said, when I found him folding clothes into his suitcase. She needs me right now, and honestly, I need some time to think about whether this marriage can survive what happened. I begged him to stay, promised that I would make everything right, swore that I would never doubt him again. But Marcus just looked tired and sad when he said, "The problem is not that you doubted me, Autumn. The problem is that when it mattered most, you chose to believe the worst about me instead of giving me the benefit of the doubt. You chose your father's word over mine." Marcus stayed at his mother's house in Dallas for 2 weeks, during which time I barely functioned as a human being. I called in sick to work more days than I attended, spent hours crying in our empty bedroom, and replayed every moment of our relationship looking for signs I had missed about his character. Frank tried to visit several times, but I refused to see him. I could not bear to look at the man whose poison had infected my marriage, whose anger had convinced me to destroy the best thing in my life. When he called, I let it go to voicemail. When he texted, I deleted his messages without reading them. Diana's condition worsened during Marcus's stay, and she was hospitalized twice. Each time I sent flowers and cards expressing my regret and support, but I did not know if Marcus was even telling her about them. I felt completely shut out from the crisis that my husband was facing alone. When Marcus finally came home, it was with conditions that felt like barriers around his heart. He agreed to try rebuilding our marriage, but only if Frank was completely removed from our lives. No visits, no phone calls, no emergency contacts, nothing. I tried to negotiate, explaining that despite his flaws, Frank was still my father and had been trying to protect me. Marcus listened patiently, then said, "Your father convinced you that I was lying when I was telling the truth. He physically attacked me in our home. He coached you to lie to the police about what happened. And now you want him to remain part of our family." The conversation that followed was the hardest of my life. Marcus explained that he could not feel safe or trusted in a marriage where my father had that kind of influence over my decisions. He said that every time Frank visited, he would wonder if I was looking for reasons to doubt him again. For the first time in my life, I had to choose between the family I was born into and the family I had chosen to create. I thought about my mother, who had spent years making excuses for Frank's behavior until it finally destroyed her happiness. I thought about Diana fighting for her life while her son chose to protect me from worry instead of seeking comfort for himself. The choice was clearer than I wanted to admit. I called Frank and told him that he was no longer welcome in my life. The conversation was brutal, with Frank accusing Marcus of manipulating me and predicting that I would regret choosing my husband over my blood family. But for the first time, I could hear the selfishness in Frank's anger, the way he made my marriage crisis about his own hurt feelings. Marcus and I started couples counseling the following month, working with Dr. Patricia Williams, a therapist who specialized in rebuilding trust after betrayal. The irony was not lost on me that I was the one who had committed the betrayal, not Marcus. Through months of difficult sessions, I learned that trust is not just about believing your partner is faithful. It is about believing they deserve the benefit of the doubt when situations look bad. I learned that love means choosing to see the best in someone even when outside voices are telling you to see the worst. Marcus learned to forgive, but forgiveness did not erase the impact of what had happened. There were nights when he would wake up from dreams about being arrested, days when he would flinch if I raised my voice during an argument. The trauma of being attacked by someone he thought was family, then betrayed by the person he loved most, had changed something fundamental in him. But slowly, carefully, we rebuilt what we had lost. Marcus began sharing more about his fears and vulnerabilities instead of protecting me from them. I began trusting my own judgment about his character instead of looking for external validation from people who did not know him the way I did. Diana lived for 14 more months after her initial diagnosis, long enough to see Marcus and me renew our wedding vows in a small ceremony at her bedside. She passed away peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning, holding both of our hands. At her funeral, I met Sarah, the nurse whose text messages I had so catastrophically misinterpreted. She was indeed a beautiful young woman, professional and kind, who had worked overtime to make Diana's final months as comfortable as possible. When she hugged Marcus and told him what a devoted son he had been, I felt ashamed all over again for the assumptions I had made. The hardest lesson I learned from this experience was that the people who claim to be protecting you from hurt are sometimes the ones causing the most damage. Frank's warnings about cheating men had been projections of his own guilt, his own need to justify his past behavior by convincing himself that all men were capable of the same betrayals. But I also learned that real love is worth fighting for, even when you are the one who damaged it in the first place. Marcus could have walked away from our marriage and been completely justified. Instead, he chose the harder path of forgiveness and rebuilding, teaching me what actual devotion looks like. Today, our marriage is stronger than it was before the crisis, but it carries scars that serve as daily reminders of how quickly trust can be destroyed and how much work it takes to rebuild it. I never heard from Frank again after our final phone call, and while part of me grieves the loss of that relationship, I know it was necessary for my marriage to survive. Sometimes we have to lose something to truly understand its value, but fortunately, real love is always worth the fight to get it back. The question I want to leave you with is this: when faced with doubt about someone you love, do you choose to trust what you know about their character, or do you let outside voices convince you to expect the worst? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting your marriage? Share your thoughts in the comments below because your experiences might help someone else navigate a similar situation. If this story resonated with you or taught you something about the importance of trust in relationships, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about love loss and the lessons that help us grow. Share this with someone who might need to hear about the power of choosing love over fear. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that even our biggest mistakes can become our greatest teachers if we are brave enough to learn from them.